Welcome to Napa Valley Inside Out. I'm Latife Hayson, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast, shining a light on one of the most beautiful and coveted lifestyles in the world. If you're interested in developing a property, planting a vegetable garden, making olive oil, fashion, architecture, interior design, county rules and regulations, biking paths, art, getting into the wine business, farming practices, the tax benefits of owning a vineyard, or the ultimate private tours and tastings, and all the fabulous annual cultural events we enjoy here, and so much more, then you won't want to miss this show. Every week I will be interviewing amazing talent, vintners, entrepreneurs, leaders, consultants, festival organizers, and well-known personalities in the Valley. They will share their knowledge, experience, advice, goals, passions, and their best-kept secrets. Hello everyone, Joel Dickerson of Madrone Engineering is with us today. Joel is a highly respected civil engineer here in Napa Valley, and we're going to be talking about some of the complexities of developing wine country property. Joel, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. You have a degree in music from Walla Walla, and you have a Master of Science degree in civil engineering from UC Berkeley. So tell us the road to Napa and how music and engineering fit together.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that. Music has always been very important to me, and I finished college with that degree, and I went to New York to be a piano player. And I enjoyed a variety of opportunities doing music there. But I also loved math, as many musicians do. And when I realized that I didn't want to pursue a career in music, but I wanted to keep it as more of a hobby, I gravitated back to the math-loving side of myself, and I ended up coming to California and going to school at Berkeley, as you say, getting a degree in transportation engineering, which is a part of civil engineering.
But you had quite a bit of fun in New York. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did. So I got to play for at least one off-Broadway show, and I also helped people with their auditions to get on to the Broadway shows, and then I played for ballet classes as well, along with other music in various places in the city. Yep, wherever I could find it to earn an additional buck.
Lots of fun. You must have been very busy now since the October wildfires. What has that demand been like for you?
Well, it's interesting. We were, of course, here for the fires, and I didn't even think about the effect that would have on my business, other than the fact that we closed for a few days because St. Helena was out of power. But when I returned, I quickly realized that all of the homes that had burned were going to need to be rebuilt, and that those people would need help with their permits, which is what my business is doing. So we have seen probably at least a 50% uptick in our business, simply to try to help the additional people who are trying to rebuild get those permits in a timely manner.
So what percentage of the fire survivors do you think are rebuilding?
Well, the county actually did a study on that, and according to that study, I think it was less than 20% of the people were saying that they were not going to rebuild. So as far as I know, at least 70 to 80% of the people, intend to or have already started to rebuild.
Really? Because only a couple of months ago when I did some research, it was the other way around. So it's changing. And most of these homes are up in the hillsides, right?
Yes.
So where are you working? Tell us about the hillsides and the complexities of some of those hillsides.
Yeah, well, the three big fires, of course, the Tubbs Fire in Calistoga.
Right.
It's a lot of isolated properties out there with long driveways.
Right.
And then Atlas Fire, unfortunately, did a lot of damage coming down into the Silverado Country Club even.
Right.
And Atlas Peak is actually a very challenging place to have septic systems because there's little to no dirt.
Right.
And then, of course, the fires here on the west side, the Nuns and the Partridge. Yeah. Again, devastation for the driveways and all the homes back there.
And so apparently the statistics are that the vast majority of people who lost their homes were in the 70s. And that's why they were saying, in fact, I was talking to John Tudor of Napa County tax assessor. That's why they were saying that most people were, in the beginning, not wanting to rebuild. Who wants to rebuild, in their 70s? Yeah. Yep. So, it's interesting because when people come here to buy real estate, I always think of them as first home buyers, even though they've probably bought, many other homes in other places. But, they've never bought a property that requires a well, that requires a septic. They don't know what a septic system is. They usually want a little vineyard, if not a big vineyard, and they've never had that experience either. So there's a huge educational process that we go through. And sometimes it takes people a year or two to make up their mind what they want to do, because it's kind of terrifying as well. So today I'm very excited about our conversation because there are so many complexities when building a home. And so I wanted to run through them with you. But firstly, for the fire survivors, I know that the county has changed the guidelines and been lenient with some of the codes so that a lot of the people who lost their homes would be able to afford to rebuild. And of course, one of the big things that you and I have been talking about is driveways. And as you and I know from living here in the valley, that many properties that we go to in the county outside of the city limits, the driveways are hairy. I mean, we hear it from clients all the time. Even driving up a steep driveway and bang, you're there in 1 minute. A lot of people do not like that, and we're used to it. But what comes with that is they usually can only take one car each way, one car. The turnouts have to be what? What are the turnouts? What is the code for turnouts on a driveway today?
Yeah, the code is for a simple single residence, it's every 400 feet. You're supposed to have an area at least 22 feet wide and 30 feet long, with some tapers beyond that as well, that one car could pull to the side while an oncoming car could, travel past them.
So that's 400 feet.
Every 400 feet. So if you have a longer driveway, you might look at 6 or 8 or 10 of these needing to be put in.
And that's okay. I mean, the cost is one thing, but I find 400 feet's a long way.
It is.
At nighttime, it's a long way. It's a long way during the day too. And how many times do we have to back up? So the person who has to back up is on the downhill, correct?
Usually, yes.
That's the law.
That's
the rule.
The custom, yes.
That's the custom. And they're normally pretty windy too. So
it can be very difficult to back down these driveways.
Right. So one of the big things was, the fire trucks were going up the driveways, and if cars were coming down, I would imagine it would have been a real problem.
I would imagine so as well.
But as you were saying, the fires happened so fast that a lot of the fire trucks didn't even get to go up these driveways because...
Yeah, the speed of the fire that first night especially meant that the fire trucks were in some cases racing to stay ahead of the flames and not get caught in them.
Right. And so one of the challenges is that, one of the codes that the county's being lenient with is the driveways. And so we're required to have a driveway, which has to be how wide?
It is supposed to be at least 14 feet wide from bottom to top.
Right. For trucks to get through. Then you're supposed to have a fire truck turnaround, which is a hammerhead. How much space does that take up?
Hammerheads are fairly large. They're about 60 feet wide and about 60 feet long with a kind of a radius on each side.
Right.
So it's about 3,500 square feet if you look at it in plan view.
Is it really? 3,500 square feet? Wow, I have one of those.
Bigger than some house footprints,
That is bigger than a house footprint, yeah. So you and I know that a lot of places don't have enough room for that, right? Yep. So it's kind of surprising that the county is being lenient with that. But some of these driveways, it becomes too expensive. They would have to blow out a lot of the rock to make them wider.
Build tall walls.
Right. So what's your experience since the fires, what is your experience with how the county's dealing with these situations? Are they being too lenient?
They're walking a fine line, I believe. And I will say, I think they've actually done a really great job of responding to the crisis. Yeah. They very quickly have kind of come out with the guidelines of what it's going to take to get a permit. And they've also given people an accelerated review time. So if you go in for a permit, they will give you comments within 7 days instead of the normal 30. So having said that, they have also removed quite a few of the normal code requirements that would happen if you came in and wanted to build a normal house. And I think, I don't know the entire inner workings behind the decision, but it seems that they have made a big effort to balance the concerns of making things more safe and more practical against the realities of the hillsides and what it would take to do that.
Right. And what are some of the codes that they are lenient with?
They have to abide by essentially all of the building code, but they have said they are going to allow rebuilds as long as the size is within a certain percentage of what the house was previously.
125%,
125% of what was there. And as long as you are not adding any bedrooms to what you had before, then you would not be required to bring your septic system up to code.
Right.
Which can be a complicated and expensive thing.
Yeah.
What the county has said there is that it must be inspected, and if any repairs are needed, it must be repaired. So it has to be functional. It doesn't have to be code compliant.
And are you finding that the insurance companies are being good with paying for all the engineering that has to be done? Because, I mean, a lot of places, they lost their wells, the power lines were out, that power hasn't been brought back. So there's a lot of civil, I mean, I've been through this with clients, right?
Yes, I'm sure.
Boy, have I been through it. And in fact, one property that I sold, it burned to the ground. It was the most complex, and still going on after nearly a year, complex sale I've ever done. And I mean, that bar none. Forget the wineries and all that. This has been really, really complicated because of a bridge, etc. So are you finding that the insurance companies are really stepping up and making sure that, you know, the engineering is fully paid?
For the most part, yes. I mean, I have heard the occasional horror story about an insurance company, you know, maybe not being responsive or maybe saying that the coverage isn't there, for example. But for most of my clients who are using insurance money, they have been receiving it, you know, and they've been. It's from what I could tell, it's up to them to decide how they spend it. So it's really them who are paying the engineering fees and not so much directly the insurance companies.
Because people really don't realize how much money is spent in the infrastructure. People come to the Valley and they say, oh, you know, I can build a house for X dollars per square foot. And I go, well, yes, that's definitely possible. But now you have to think about the infrastructure. The infrastructure can be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It can be. I'm glad you had me on the show today. Thank you for that. I do sort of feel like civil engineering isn't talked about all that much because it relates to things that are not as glamorous, you might say, as maybe the beautiful glass windows or the views or the vineyard. And those things are, of course, very important. And it's what makes the Napa Valley. But the things that we work on are essentials. You know, having clean water and dealing with your wastewater and being able to get to and from your property on a good road is, I would say, required, even if not glamorous.
Erosion control, and how many times do we see these steep driveways? How much money goes into the water management, the erosion control, the pipes? I mean, how much money? I mean, on some of these deals, really, you know, what are the figures?
Well, it can be in the hundreds of thousands. I have done a $2 million driveway where $2 million was just on the driveway.
Yep, I've seen $3 million driveways as well. Yeah. So
but that's a special property, of course, where someone needs to get to a mountaintop.
And engineering sites up and all of that good stuff. Let's stay on roads. I recently had a situation where a beautiful property that I sold had a guest house. It was zoned ag watershed, so it could also have a second unit with a kitchen.
Yes.
And some buyers just fell in love with the property, and they met an engineer at the property, and because they can have that extra building, and then they discovered that the driveway, about 150 feet of the driveway, was over the new slope of 16%. So therefore, they would have had to spend, the estimate was like $200,000, so that it didn't go over 16%. So let's talk about the driveways, what the slope can be, because I'm seeing more and more, and now I'm aware, I wasn't aware before this, if you're zoned ag watershed, you can have 3 buildings. Everything is septic permitting. You can have a main house as large as you like, a guest house,
maximum of 1,000 square feet.
Right, no kitchen, and then an ag preserve can have the same. If you have ag watershed, you get one more dwelling, which is 1,200 square feet, must have a kitchen, right? But this property was zoned ag watershed. But you would have to make the changes to the driveway to be able to have what it's zoned for. So tell us about the driveway standards, the new driveway standards.
They have been in flux, actually. The county revised them 4 times between 2016 and 2017. And that was partly a result of the county actually had to do a fairly complicated negotiation with California Department of Forestry. And I will say the county was able to strike a fairly good deal. We actually have a more relaxed standard than the state allows. So if we were stuck on the state standards, 16% would be the maximum grade, actually. But currently, the county standards do allow us to go up to 20% in certain circumstances and with certain mitigations. Exceeding 20%, however, is not allowed anymore.
Right. But to go from 16 to 20%, you have to have an environmental reason. And what would they be, those environmental reasons?
Yeah, you have to have one of the findings to support what's called a road exception. And if I remember them all, we'll see if I do. So you have to have a legal constraint. So maybe your easement is very narrow across your neighbor's property or something like that. You could get an exception approved if there are steep slopes, so that means steeper than 2 to 1. And you could get an exception approved if it preserves unique features of the natural habitat, including large native trees. So it couldn't be like a row of trees that you or the previous homeowner planted, but if it is native trees that have been there for decades or centuries, that could support the approval and no exception.
So in this particular instance, there were no exceptions. Right, it had to be. You had to spend the money. Let's talk about septic systems. There's standard septic systems and there's engineered septic systems.
Indeed, and there are a lot of engineered systems, a lot of different types.
Yes, and they're more expensive. So, explain to our viewers, if you will, the difference between a standard septic and an engineered septic.
I'd be happy to. A standard system is the way that it has been dealt with for a long time, and you simply have a tank, and then out of the tank, the wastewater flows into what are called leach lines. And these are perforated pipes with holes in them that are in kind of rows in the ground somewhere. And the goal is that water can infiltrate into the soil and that the solids stay in the tank. And
you need 100% reserve area.
And you need 100% reserve area.
In case it fails.
It fails. And what does failure mean? So failure might mean that the soil has been overloaded, maybe, and so that wastewater might be starting to come to the surface, or maybe it's making its way to a nearby drainage too quickly or something like that.
And then an engineered septic system uses less space. If you don't have enough space for a standard septic system, or your soil does not percolate.
If you don't have enough soil depth, that's really the key. You have
to
have about 5 feet of soil depth to get a standard system approved. And it can be very hard to find that depth on the hillside.
So therefore you move to an engineered septic system. Tell us about that.
So engineered can mean a lot of things, but the main thing that it means is that you have some sort of pre-treatment device in there. So rather than doing nothing with the wastewater other than running it through a tank, you now have to do something to it to reduce the pollutant quantity that's in that water. So it could be like an aeration unit. It could be a media filter. It could be some other alternatives beyond that. So it gets a little more complicated. You'll have multiple tanks. You'll have pumps in them probably. You'll have control panels with those pumps. You have to bring electricity down to wherever the tanks are. And you got to deal with then pressurized pipe to get down to maybe a different kind of leach field. So things get more complicated, more expensive.
And also the county comes and inspects them every year, right?
Every year,
and there's a fee for that.
There is a fee for that, and you're required to hire a licensed contractor to also inspect it each year and to monitor it for you.
Yeah,
in case
so
there are any problems.
These are all the things you have to take into account when you're building, particularly hillside, all
Yep.
these extra expenses. Let's talk about wells.
Great.
What people don't realize is that you have to be not only 100 feet from your own septic system and your own reserve area, you have to be 100 feet from all of your neighbors' septic systems and reserves. I know, because I built it on a half an acre. It was a challenge. It really was.
Yep.
Everybody's got their wells and their septic all around you, and so that can really limit how many bedrooms you can have. Okay, so we have to be 100 feet from them. What have you heard about the county perhaps limiting properties to one well?
I haven't heard a whole lot about that specifically, but I certainly could see some scenarios where, especially if there are a lot of neighboring septic systems, allowing you to drill that second well might not happen.
Right, yeah. And what about meters? Have you heard anything about metering wells to preserve water?
Well, I have, and that's a very sticky issue. The law is currently being decided and written, and the enforcement is being decided as well. But from what I understand, a discretionary project, so you could think of it as something that's maybe optional. Those are currently required to meter their water use and report that to the county. So that would be any discretionary permit for a vineyard, so that means a vineyard on a hillside, or any discretionary permit, which means a major expansion to a winery or a new winery. Residential use is not discretionary, it's considered ministerial, and so there are currently no requirements to meter your water use for a residence.
Yeah, there was talk about it during the...
Yes, these things come and go as the droughts come and go.
As the droughts come and go.
Yes.
Let's talk about setbacks. Setbacks from creeks, setbacks from pools, setbacks from... What can you share with our...
Boy, there's a lot of setbacks,
There's a lot of setbacks. Well, the creek one I think is really interesting.
Yeah, there's two kinds, really. So
Tell us.
Yeah, the creek setback comes out of the zoning code.
Right.
And it's the conservation and development regulations. And that specifically applies to blue line streams or streams that meet the county definition of a stream. So it needs a certain depth, it needs to show that it has water-loving vegetation, it needs to have some evidence that it is a creek and not maybe just a simple drainage. And so there's a lot of discussion on many projects trying to decide which is which. But if you have one of those on your property, you would have a setback from that, and the setback means technically no earthwork of any kind, so no disturbing the soil.
So less than 1%.
The setback is a function of the slope of the ground coming towards your creek.
Right.
So if you're down on the valley floor somewhere and you're very flat land, the setback could be as small as 35 feet.
Okay, so I went through that. So 35 feet is if you have less than 1% slope, which you can't see. And then
flat.
if you go from 1% to 5%, which you still can't see, it's 45 feet.
45 feet, yes.
And then it goes up to 55 feet.
And then it actually goes up as high as 150.
It's unbelievable.
Depending, as the land gets steeper in the hillsides, it becomes 100 and 125 and 150.
Yeah. I could write a book on setbacks.
They can be very limiting. So that's the creek conservation setbacks. Then there are another set of setbacks is what is found in the zoning based on your property zoning. So it's kind of the building setback. And it's referred to as a yard setback. Those are fairly straightforward. Nothing too crazy in there. And then the third kind of setback is related to environmental health, which means your wells and your septic systems.
Right.
And there's an entire table of setbacks there that portions of your septic system must be 25 feet from a pool, 100 feet from a well, 100 feet from a cave, or maybe even as much as 400 feet from a cave, depending on the type of your system. Setbacks from drainages, from water lines, from the building themselves, like a footing, a structure. So if you have a property that is less than an acre, you should be thinking about setbacks when you're looking at that property.
But also, the point also is that if you're buying in the hillsides, you can buy 60 acres, you can buy 40 acres, but typically there's only about an acre that's usable.
Yeah.
So you're very, very restricted. And before we move on to the view shed ordinance, I do have a quick question for you. Does the second unit still have to be within 500 feet of the main house?
Yes, I believe so.
It does, can't be further. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about view shed ordinance.
There's an exception to everything, so you might be able to argue for an
Yeah.
exception on some properties.
Yeah.
But
And good luck with that, I'd
Yeah.
say. So tell us about the view shed ordinance.
View shed ordinance is created to help protect the natural beauty and the natural views of Napa County. And again, the county is trying to balance two very different things, which is the desire for people to build homes that have views and the desire for the county to feel a certain way and not have someone driving down 29 and feeling like they're looking maybe in the Berkeley Hills,
Right.
where you just
Yes.
see nothing but homes.
Right.
I mean, you do see trees as well, but it's homes.
So in theory, you're not supposed to be able to see houses when you're driving down either of the two main arteries, which is Silverado Trail, Highway 29, or on any of the cross streets. You're not supposed to be able to see houses up in the hillside. We
Clearly that has worked out perfectly.
Yes. Well,
and it
more
isn't
on
that you're
that.
not supposed to see. I believe the requirement is that no more than 49% of the house should be visible.
Oh, is
so
that
they
right?
they want half or more to be covered by
Trees.
native trees or trees that you plant.
Yes.
Or green
Right.
shrubs.
Which of
things
course
like
blocks
that.
their views, and as soon as they get their permits, they take them down so you can
It
see
does-
them.
it does
But they have a
happen.
pole theory, and they make you put up a pole that's 35 feet tall. Then they go down to the valley and they want to see if they can see the flag on top of the pole.
Yes.
I don't know how many
That
deals
happens.
I've done this on.
Happens a lot.
Let's see. Undergrounding utilities. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I had an experience years ago where looking at a house up on the hillside, like on a steep driveway off Silverado Trail, and so there were lines running all the way up along the hillside, going up to Calistoga, and I had some surgeon or cancer specialist that was looking at the property, and they said, no, high voltage wires, don't buy here. So what do you know about the wires, the wires along hillsides? Is that true that they are dangerous? They have a higher voltage that can cause cancer? Do you know that?
I don't have any special information on that.
Yeah.
I know that since I was a kid, I have kind of wanted to stay away from them.
Yes.
Just a feeling that I have.
Yeah, no.
But it does make sense both from that perspective and from a view perspective to look at undergrounding your utilities.
So think about that when you're looking at properties that are on ridges, and just ask the question, I would say. Undergrounding utilities can be pretty expensive. Well, those, they can't underground those. But for yourself, there's a lot of undergrounding. That's also, you have to think about when you're doing developments, the cost of doing that if you don't want to have unsightly low voltage. Right. What else would you like to share with us about conservation and development in Napa Valley?
Well, I just would say that the county has made a goal to balance the two ends, and if you're approaching your project realizing that, you're a lot more likely to have success. If you're coming in with your project thinking, I'm going to get every single thing I want with no compromises, it might be a lot harder for you.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to give and take on some items, you'll probably end up with pretty much exactly what you want. But just be cognizant of the fact that there may be some restrictions on where it's going to happen, or what time of year it can happen, or those sorts of things.
And be careful about doing things without permits.
Be very careful, yes.
Particularly,
don't do it.
Definitely don't do it.
Yeah.
Yes, we definitely say don't do it.
Yeah.
And because it can come back to bite you. I mean, I've seen it happen where people have put in unbelievably expensive French stone pillars for gates, etc., and then somebody else comes along who has an easement through the driveway, and they want to build a house, and then the fire trucks can't get through, and you have to take them down, and it could be many hundreds of thousands of dollars to
Absolutely.
take them down. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but just tell us a little bit about anything you'd like to share with us about commercial development.
Straightforward than commercial. Commercial has a little bit, the regulations are treating you property.
Right.
So you're going to have requirements for accessible space, depending on.
Right.
And if you're on a steep property, it can be very hard to have a path that meets the accessibility requirements. And then there will be also a higher bar for you to meet in terms of your water use, as we talked about, and potentially your septic system as well.
Yeah.
And certainly your driveway. Your driveway has to be much wider and much more robust for any kind of commercial use.
And I would just say, as we close, that if you are building or rebuilding, because it's so hard to get insurance now, if not almost impossible, or you're going to pay through the nose for it, do everything you can to make it more attractive to the insurance companies. Like put a pipe from your pool to the fire hydrant.
Absolutely.
Even if you have a storage tank, do that. Do metal roofs if you can. Just do everything you possibly can, because getting insurance right now is incredibly difficult. And all of our insurance policies, premiums are going to be going up.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice. And have a solar gate, because they can get in with a key, but you can't get out if there's no power and your gate doesn't open. So you need solar.
Yeah.
So Joel, thank you
Steve?
so much for coming on the show and
Thank you very much for
sharing
having
all
me.
that knowledge with our clients, because our viewers, because there's so much building going on now.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next week.